This video is about the German claim to sole representation in the Hallstein Doctrine. The claim to sole representation was an official foreign policy of the Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany, in the years from 1949 to 1969. Its main instrument was the Hallstein Doctrine, named after Walter Hallstein, but formulated by Wilhelm Greve. To the background. Relatively quickly after the Second World War, the East-West conflict, the Cold War, started. And on German soil, there were two states, de facto two states. The Federal Republic of Germany in the West as a democratic state, and the Socialist German Democratic Republic as a Soviet satellite. The objective of the Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany, was to establish a free, unified and sovereign nation state. Whilst on the other hand, the GDR wanted the two-state solution. In their words, they wanted to secure the first socialist state on German soil. Now to the claim to sole representation. The Federal Republic was founded in 1949. In the same year, their first Chancellor Adenauer said only the West German government is legitimized to internationally represent all Germans, including the Germans in East Germany. And that is because the West German government is the only freely elected one. This position was backed by the Western allies, Western partners, in 1954. Now to the Hallstein Doctrine. And in hindsight, ironically, shortly before the Hallstein Doctrine came into effect, Adenauer went to Moscow mainly to negotiate the release of the last prisoners of war. And in return, he had to establish diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union. And a few days later, in the same month, the Hallstein Doctrine was formulated, stating that if a state establishes diplomatic relations to East Germany, that is seen as an unfriendly act and will result in the termination to the own diplomatic relations. In December of 1955, this new doctrine of international policies, of foreign policies, was made public at a conference of ambassadors. And of course, there were a few relations that were terminated. Yugoslavia in 1957 and the relations to Cuba in 1963. One incident made clear that the Germans, the West Germans, were actually serious about this, was when President Nasser of Egypt received the head of the GDR, Ulbricht, like a high guest of state. Germany said, right, then you will not get any development aid from us anymore. But later in the 60s, there was the birth defect theory, stating the Soviet satellites in Eastern Europe actually had, directly after the Second World War, had no chance. They were pressured by the Soviets and had to recognize the GDR. So it's not their fault. And that enabled West Germany to establish relations to Romania and also then resume in 1968 the diplomatic relations to Yugoslavia. The end of the Hallstein Doctrine and the claim to sole representation was Brandt's new Eastern policy. The core of this new policy was that the GDR, East Germany, should be a key and equal or nearly equal partner in the East-West dialogue and the East-West policies. And of course, this can't go along with the claim to sole representation and the Hallstein Doctrine, that actually here we have contradictions. Now, as mentioned, the end was the new Eastern policy, but the Hallstein Doctrine and the claim to sole representation also contributed largely to the fact that West Germany had a much larger international influence than the GDR. It also meant there was a small base for a dialogue with the East, with the Germans, Eastern Germans, and with the Eastern Bloc. But also, it gave an emphasis on the strong will to reunify Germany as a free country, and in 1990 Germany was reunified. That was the German claim to sole representation and the Hallstein Doctrine in 5.